Hi guys, it's Halen. Um, I'm going to be doing 9 or so days of quarantine story time. This was originally meant for Bluebell's kids, but any of you guys who want to watch, feel free to join. I'll try to get these uploaded afternoon or so every day, 1 or 2 chapters of my book, Curse of the Mud Spirit. This is written by me and illustrated by Cameron Roark. And I originally actually did a fancy video with overlaying the illustrations, but the internet's just not having that, so I'm literally just going to do it where I show you old school pictures as we go along. And this book is dedicated to Alan Herman. I think you're incapable of saying no, but I appreciate you all the same. And that's because Alan has been instrumental in so many of my projects, including my books. He's one of my personal heroes. I'm going to upload this on YouTube. It'll be there all the time for you guys. I'll also probably put it on Instagram, so that'll be for 24 hours. But if you want to catch up, find Curse of the Mud Spirit on YouTube. This is a pseudo-children's book, so there's always a disclaimer ahead of time that I think this is appropriate for most children, but you know your kid, and if fantasy stuff is a little bit scary for them, use your best discretion. This is a great book for adults as well. And towards the end, there is a little bit of strong language, so just a heads up on that for those sensitive. Nothing you wouldn't really see on network television, but we always want to make sure you know it's coming. So, Chapter 1. It was a perfect sunny Sunday afternoon, as it always is in stories like these, where little children are out playing with hula hoops, wearing overalls, and picking daisies. Thomas was one of these children, and although he was not hula hooping, picking daisies, he was in fact wearing overalls. You might think that when someone is wearing overalls, it may be mandatory to wear a straw hat and to have a long weed in their mouths, but this is not so. Thomas had neither of these things, but he did have a bucket with a small shovel in it. These tools were excellent for catching crawfish out of the mud at the brook down below the bridge near the street that Thomas didn't know the name of, but always remembered because the bushes looked like hamburgers, and Thomas did love hamburgers. His mother had made it clear her wishes were for him to be back before dinner, in time to wash up and change out of those horrible little overalls he insisted on wearing. She also on occasion would throw away his favorite, not to mention only, hat, but luckily Thomas also received great enjoyment from digging in the trash while his mother was away. This ensured that his hat truly never left home. Because his mother was the kind of woman who would tell her children that the family dog went to live on a farm instead of telling them it was mistaken for part of the road, she never said anything when she would see Thomas wearing the hat again after one of her many attempts to get rid of it. To that same note, Thomas was never the kind of child to question why his hat was in the garbage, and much like the pie crusts and old makeup in which he would eat and feed the stray cats, he would put the hat back on his head and continue about his daily life. As Thomas walked shoeless, he pondered how meat gets from a cow to a steak. It didn't make much sense to him, for the way a cow looks is much different than a steak, and perhaps steaks are really just small cows? This made sense to him, since when you eat fish, you can tell what it is because it looks like a fish. It is quite understandable how a very small cow might make a whole steak. But what about chicken? Seeing hamburger-shaped bushes in the distance and a small barn that looked like a tunnel that encompassed the bridge, Thomas's heart began to fill with butterflies. He knew he was so close to what was going to be the most exciting part of his day. Down at the brook, he saw most of the crawfish holes were on the opposite side as he was, and knowing better than to come home covered in mud, he decided to take the bridge instead of crossing the creek. As he approached the bridge, he paused, though, remembering how his mother had told him never to walk in the street alone, or at all if possible. He realized the bridge was nothing but street inside the tunnel. There was no sidewalk or any other way around. But not being discouraged easily, Thomas decided it would be easier to balance very carefully on the outside of the tunnel, and as long as he kept his back straight against the outside wall, he should be fine. As he began crossing the brook in such a daring way, he was thankful for being shoeless. He was also thankful for hamburgers, being reminded constantly of this by the bushes on the street. He wondered about hamburgers, though. As far as he knew, they were also made of cow. Now, as little sense as the steak makes, hamburger patties make even less sense. What part of the cow is it? Why is it such a perfect shape? Do they make it that shape to fit the buns? Or are the buns made that shape because of the patties? He wondered what kind of cow such a strange shape would come from. Interrupting his train of thought, the brook below began to bubble, and Thomas noticed it was quite muddy, much like crawfish had taken over the entire creek. He tried to hold back his excitement so he could maintain his balance on the narrow rail he was shimmying sideways along. His heart fluttered more and more. Either there were hundreds of them, or there were a few gigantic, maybe even child-sized ones. Thomas pictured a giant crawfish friend. He too would be wearing overalls and eating hamburgers, and they would build a playhouse of mud together. Maybe Mom would even have him over for dinner. But as any non-makeup eating person would not have been surprised to see, no giant crawfish sprouted from the brook with a hilarious greeting. Instead, two giant blue eyes and a large ghastly mouth appeared out of the huge mud bubble in the middle of the brook. "Son," said the mud creature, turning into a humanoid shape, "would you like to come down for something to eat? I am a friend of your mother's. She has told me so much about you." "A friend of my mother's," replied Thomas. "My mother would not be friends with anyone who lived in the mud." "Ah, see, that's where you are mistaken. We met in Mom College. Our dorms were near each other, and we had the same science class," spouted the mud creature in a very matter-of-fact way. "If I did not know your mother, I wouldn't know your name, Thomas." "Well, how do I know that you just didn't read my mind? Tell me something only my mother would know to prove you are not just some random mud creature," retorted Thomas, but he was almost starting to believe him. Now, even though the mud creature was actually reading Thomas's mind, he was quick with an answer, since when you can read others' minds, you usually know all the answers you need to about as fast as they would. "First off, I am a mud spirit, and it is very rude to call me creature. Second, you love hamburgers, crawfish, digging in the trash, and those horrible little overalls. She told me all about it on the phone just last week." "Well, all of those things are all true, and I wasn't thinking any of them, so I guess I know you didn't read my mind." Little did Thomas know that the way Mud Spirit reads minds isn't traditional at all, if reading minds was ever traditional. If it's in your mind, he can pull it out without you ever knowing, as long as he is experienced and practiced in his Mud Spirit roles. The periwinkle, glittery eyes looked up at Thomas with the most innocence, and the actually innocent forest green eyes of Thomas looked down at the mud spirit from the bridge railing. "Well, as you might already know, my mother is making hamburgers tonight. Where they come from, I do not know, but I do know where they end up is in my belly, where they will make me very, very happy. So I can't come to dinner with you, but if you would like to catch some crawfish on the bank with me, you should. It's the most fun thing to do on a Sunday." "How delightful!" exclaimed the mud spirit. "Throw me your pail. It will be easier for you to climb down from the bridge that way. Being a mud spirit, I'm very good at catching crawfish. You will find yourself very lucky to have my help." Thomas tossed down his yellow pail, along with the tiny blue shovel, all the way down to the mud spirit, who caught it in his round, mitten-like hands that emerged from the boggy creek. While climbing down off the bridge and down to the bank of the brook, Thomas was thinking, what happens after that wonderful sensation in his belly after eating hamburgers? Where does it go? What happens to make it change shape again? When it leaves and goes down the toilet, does it change again after the toilet digests it the way he does? Does it turn back into a patty? Or maybe back into a cow? Maybe it takes several patties and steaks to get together down in the toilet's belly before there's enough to make a whole cow again. He put his 2 bare feet solid on the ground and straightened his favorite hat. He began walking over to the mud spirit, and he noticed that the water in the brook was entirely mud now, thick and chocolate brown. It was the most perfect mud he had ever seen. Imagine the crawfish that would live in it. He stared down at their little towers. There had to be 20, maybe even more. Looking up at the mud spirit with glee, Thomas noticed objects rising from the earthy soup. Little plastic ships, a baseball bat, a toy train. They were all popping up to the surface in the mud bubble bath. There was a dog collar, a laundry basket, a smelly-looking sneaker, and many other odd, out-of-place objects that you would not expect to see emerging from a bog of mud. Stopping at the edge of the water on the bank, Thomas asked, "Hey, Mud Spirit, what is all this junk floating in the brook?" The Mud Spirit did not answer. He was making a horrible face, like his eyes smelled something awful, and his cheeks were filled with air as if holding in his breath. He broke the face for a moment to say, in a very odd voice, "I'll tell you all about it, but first take your pail and let's get started on these crawfish." As the Mud Spirit resumed his strange actions, Thomas stepped over to take his bucket. He was about to ask him what was wrong with his face when the Mud Spirit let loose the air in his cheeks in a giant rush of wind, letting his mouth fly wide open, and lunged forward. Without much time to react, the Mud Spirit bit Thomas's head right off. So we'll pick up on chapter 2 tomorrow afternoon, if the internet is kind enough to be fast enough to help me upload this. Thanks for joining me for the first chapter of Curse of the Mud Spirit, Storytime Quarantine, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.